Advent of Code 2022, Day 3, Rucksack Reorganization. Hey everyone, I'm a senior software engineer at one of the FAANGs, and I like to make videos on Leetcode and programming challenges. And today we are taking a look at Day 3 of Advent of Code of 2022, which is called Rucksack Reorganization. So continuing with the story, one elf had the job of loading all of the rucksacks with supplies for their jungle journey. But somehow that elf didn't quite follow the instructions. Now each rucksack has two large compartments, and each compartment basically stores items. And looks like the elf made a mistake where the two compartments might have the same type of item, and an item is identified by a lowercase or uppercase letter, that is lowercase a to z and uppercase a to z, where lowercase and uppercase they're different type of items. So basically this is how our input looks like, which is just a bunch of strings, and each line represents a rucksack. So looking at the first rucksack here, it contains the items as mentioned here, and the compartments are of equal size. So the first compartment contains the items from V to R, which is this part, and then the second compartment contains items from H to P. And they say that the only type of item that appears in both the compartments is a lowercase p, as you can see right here and right here. Now further, they are asking us to identify this item, which is common to both the compartments, and convert the item into a priority, where lowercase items from A to Z have priorities from 1 through 26, and uppercase items from A to Z have priorities from 27 to 52. And as part of the output, we have to add up all of these priorities, and that will be our solution. So in the example, these were all the items and then their respective priorities, and adding them up, it turned out to be 157. So let's copy this example and then jump into our IDE. I already have day 3 folder created here with input and solution.js file. I'll put the input we copied right here and go into our solution.js. We are reading the input file using fs, and we basically do a read file sync on it. We convert it to a string and then split it on new line. So let's log these rucksacks and see if it really works. So replacing this console.log with the rucksacks and running the program, which will be node and then solutions.js. And then yes, we get an array of strings. Okay, so let's start solving part 1. Let's create a new variable where we'll store the priority sum. Let's call it total priority and assign it as 0. Then let's go over each of the rucksacks that we have. So let rucksack of rucksacks, and then in the loop, the first thing we should do is figure out the compartment size. And because there are two compartments and they're of the same size, it should basically be rucksack.length divided by 2. Let's store this in a variable as well. Let's call it compartment size. Next, we can do rucksack.substring, and we can extract characters from the 0th index all the way up to the first compartment size. So this should give us all the items in the first compartment. And as for the second compartment, we can just start our substring from the compartment size and go all the way up to the end of the string. So let's store this as items 1 and the second one as items 2. Now from here, the problem basically is figuring out the repeated character between the two strings, where the strings are items 1 and items 2. So let's say we store our repeated character in this variable, and we have a method called getRepeatedCharacter, and we pass items 1 and items 2 to it, which are the two strings. And once we have this repeated character, we can get the priority. So let's say we store that in another variable called priority, and we can create another method called getPriority and pass the character to it, which is the repeated character in this case. And then we'll just add it to our total priority, which will be done using the priority variable that we have. And that should be our answer. And then we can just console log this total priority, and that should be it. So let's see how we can implement getRepeatedCharacter method. So creating a new function called getRepeatedCharacter, which takes in two strings, let's say items 1 and items 2. So the first thing we can do is get the unique characters from each of these items. So we can do unique characters in item 1, and we can just create a new set, and we can split items 1 on an empty string, which will break it character by character and then create a new set out of it. Similarly, let's do it for items 2. We'll store this in unique chars items 2, and this should be items 1 and items 2. So now we have unique characters from each of the items. Now let's run a for loop on either of them. Let's do let item of, we can do it on item 2, and then this is as simple as doing an if check. If the first set has the item that we are iterating on from the second set, then this is our repeated character and we can just return this item. And that should be all really. And then we need a second method, which is get priority. So let's create a function for it, function get priority, which takes in a character. And if you remember, we had to return for lowercase a to z as 1 to 26 and for uppercase a to z as 27 through 52, and just adding space here. So I like to use the character code to convert from individual character to its ASCII values. So we can do char code, where we can store the char code of the character that we have that's being passed to us. So we can do char code at the 0th position. So let's say if char value was lowercase c, then char code will basically store the ASCII value of c. Now if we knew the ASCII value of a, then we can simply do ASCII value of c minus ASCII value of a plus 1. Then it will give us the position in normal alphabet count, that is 3 in this case, because c comes as the third character after a, b, and then c. But I can just never remember the ASCII value of a. So in these cases, what I do is use code to figure out what's the ASCII value of a. So we can simply do char code of lowercase a will be lowercase a and then char code at 0. And that should give us the character code of lowercase a. We can do the same for uppercase a and then do the same for upper and lowercase z, because I think we'll need these. Now if our character is lowercase character, then we just return the normal counting of the character. So let's add a condition for it. If the char code that we figured out is greater than char code of a, that is of lowercase char code, and if the char code is smaller than the lowercase z char code, then that means the character that we have here is a lowercase character. So we can simply return the char code minus char code of lowercase a and then plus 1. Otherwise, we see that for uppercase a to z, it's just basically continuing from 26. So we can do return 26 plus char code minus uppercase a char code and then plus 1. Because once we are in this else block, we know that char code is uppercase character. So looks like we didn't need uppercase char code after all, so we can remove it. And yeah, so this should be it. Let's run this for the example that we had, and we get 157, which I think matches what we had seen here. So now let's take the actual puzzle input and copy all of this into our input file. So replacing this and running this again, we get 7826 as the answer. Let's go back to advent of code and try to submit it. And this was the right answer, and we got one more gold star. So now let's see what's the story in part 2. In this part, it looks like the elves are divided into groups of 3, and each elf is carrying a badge that identifies their group. And within each of the groups, the badge is basically the only item type that is being carried by all the 3 elves. So looking at the example again, this is one group with 3 rucksacks, and this is a second group with 3 more rucksacks. And in the first group, the only item type that appears in all 3 rucksacks is the lowercase r, which I think we can see here, here, and right here. And for the second group, the badge item type must be uppercase z, which we can see here, here, and right here. So basically it seems like we need to figure out what's the common item between all the 3 rucksacks, get their priorities, sum them all up, and that should be our answer. So let's go back to our IDE and let's reset our input to the example that we had, and going back to solution.js, let's work on part 2. I'll copy most of part 1 because I think a lot of these things are very similar. Instead of a for loop like this, let's change it to an index-based for loop. So loop equal to 0, loop smaller than rucksacks.length, and then loop plus plus. Okay, we don't need the compartment size or items. Now we have this method get repeated characters, which figures out the repeated characters between 2 items. And in this one, basically we need to extend it to 3 strings. So let's say we pass an array of strings here. Right now we have 2 items in here, which is item 1 and item 2. We should change the items to be rucksacks loop, and then the second item will become rucksacks loop plus 1, and we can do the third item as rucksacks loop plus 2. And so our loop shouldn't go up by 1 this time. It should go up by 3 because we are reading in groups of 3. And let's see how we can change this getRepeatedCharacter function to take in a list of strings and then figure out the repeated character between all these 3 strings. And before we update our method, let's update part 1 as well. Instead of passing the 2 strings individually, we can make this an array. So going back to our method here where we get repeated character, let's change this to items, which is basically an array of strings now. So how about we create an object? Let's call it charCount, where we store individual characters and how many times we have seen them. Now let's run a loop on each of the items that we have. So item of items, and in here, let's again do this set thing that we did before. This time we'll do it for item, and this just becomes unique characters. Now for all of the unique characters in this one individual item, let's update charCount to account for the characters that we have seen here. So basically, let's run a for loop on each of the characters in this unique characters array that we have. So let char of the unique characters, and the first thing we should do is to check if charCount has already seen this character. And we can do that by doing charCount and then putting char in here. So this condition basically says that we have seen the character, but let's say if we haven't seen it, then we can initialize charCount for this character and set the frequency as 0. And then we can basically increment the frequency by 1 because we have seen this character now. And then after this loop, charCount should have frequency of all the characters that are in items, only in a unique way. So let's say if our items were ABC, BCD, and CDE, then charCount will basically contain A as 1, B as 2, C as 2, C should actually be 3, then D as 2, and E as 1. And that's because A is only repeated once in all of these, B is repeated twice, C is repeated 3 times, D is repeated twice, and E is repeated only 1 time. Now let's say if one of the strings had repeated characters, that is A, B, B, like multiple times, B's and then C, then our frequency will still be the same because we only count B as once per string and not multiple times. And that's where this set really helps us. Now once we increase the character count, if this character was seen the same number of times as the number of items we have in this items array, that means that character was repeated in all of the strings. For example, the character C here, its frequency is 3, and that's because it was repeated in all of these 3 strings right here. And just a small correction, this D should be 2 because D was only present in these 2 strings here and not in all 3. So after incrementing the frequency for that character by 1, we can simply add a check here. If the char count of this character is equal to the length of the items, then that means this character is present in every single string. And then this basically becomes our repeated character. And we can get rid of the rest of the things that we have here. So going back to our part 2 method here, we get the repeated character, then we get the priority of it and add it to total priority, and then we log it. So let's uncomment part 2 here so that we invoke this method as well. And running the program, we get 157, which we had before, and now we get 70 as well. Let's see if this matches the example which we had here, which it does, which is 70. Now let's try to run it for the actual input that we have. So undoing it to get the actual input, and let's run the program. We see 7826 still matches what we got before, and this is our new output 2577. And let's go back to advanced code and submit this. And yes, that's the right answer as well, and we got another gold star. So we have successfully completed day 3. I hope this explanation was helpful, and you can see how easy a problem gets once you break it down into smaller parts. In this case, the problem was as simple as figuring out a common character across a bunch of strings. So if this video helps you, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. And please show me your support by buying me some coffee. And I've recently launched my Patreon, so please feel free to check it out. There are a bunch of early supporter benefits that you can get by signing up right now. And yeah, I'll keep solving more and more of these challenges here, so keep an eye out for the next video. See you next time.